Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says public places cannot be occupied indefinitely. One of the simplest definitions of democracy is government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And when it comes to the preamble of the Indian Constitution, it speaks about we, the people of India. So, who are the power controllers? It is we, that is the people of India. It is they who elect the representatives. It is the representatives which forms the government, and it is the government which can come up with certain bills and programs, and they can also initiate policy reforms as well. And if these legislations and bills are stripping away certain rights of the people will have certain grievances as well. These grievances will have to be addressed. So how will the people voice their opinion? That is ingrained in 19 of 1 of A, which speaks about freedom of speech and expression, and it is also present in article 19 of 1 of B, which assures the citizen the right to assemble peacefully without any arms. So in case there is any grievance against the government, the general public would be able to voice their opinion using the mandate given under the fundamental rights of the constitution, which is about freedom of speech and expression and also about assembling together, and that is without arms. So kindly remember, the stress here is about protest without any arms. Why are we discussing all this? Because right to protest is also an ingrained aspect which is mentioned under the fundamental rights. But is this fundamental right absolute? No. There are reasonable restrictions as well. What are these reasonable restrictions? It can be with respect to sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, defamation or incitement to an offense. So all that we discussed with respect to the protest, which is ingrained in 19 of 1 of A and 19 of 1 of B, is not absolute, but they also have reasonable restrictions as well. That is what is present according to the constitution with respect to the fundamental rights. So kindly remember, we have the right to protest and we also have reasonable restrictions when it comes to right to protest as well. Now, when you look at the significance of right to protest, why is that the right to protest is an ingrained aspect of democracy? That is because the citizens are informed. So when you have the informed citizenry, we have what is called as constitutionalism, which is the principle of limited government. But if the government is moving beyond the contours of the constitution, stripping away certain rights, the informed citizens will question the government of the day. That is the significance of protest. So what happens here? We have the people who are aware of their rights. They come up together, they form an association peacefully without arms, and they question the government of the day. So what we have is the informed citizenry. This is one of the ingrained aspect of right to protest, which is crucial when it comes to democracy. What this will further strengthen is the governance and demand the accountability from the government. What will happen here? Because the government is also coming under the control of the people can question them as well, and it is now they play a key part in the governance, asking questions to the government and keeping them accountable to the people of India as well. And in fact, when you look at the minority rights or when you look at the marginalized sector, sometimes what also happens is because they have less representation in the government, they can also be stripped of certain rights as well. That is when this protest in the form of fundamental rights, which is given to the people of India, will help in assertion of the rights of the marginalized and the poorly represented minorities. There can be brute force of the majority which can suppress the voice of the minority, but because they have the right to protest, they voice their concern, and that is how people will understand that these are the concerns. Why? Because people are participating in this very movement, and ultimately we have democracy, which is of the people, by the people, and for the people, where they become the participants in keeping the government under the check. This is the general framework when it comes to right to protest as enshrined under our constitution. Why are we discussing all this? That is because the Supreme Court has recently given a judgment, and that is in with reference to the Shaheen Bagh protest, which was taken up against the Citizenship Amendment Act. What did the Supreme Court say with respect to the Shaheen Bagh protest? The Supreme Court clearly went on to say that democracy and dissent goes hand in hand. All the demonstrations that were taken by the people, they have absolute right to take them, but this particular dissent, this particular idea of protest should happen in a designated place. So you cannot block the road. As much as you have the right to protest, there are people who are traveling, and this is snatching away their right to commute as well. So when you have the right to protest, you can do it in a designated place, but that should not take away the right of another person who has the right to travel, who has the right to commute. So democracy and dissent is every right given, but that is not absolute, says the Supreme Court of India. Why? Because it brings in that police regulations are also weighed in, and that is where it clearly goes on to say that there are certain reasonable restrictions, and this is not absolute, says the Supreme Court of India. So the fundamental rights do not live in isolation. The right of the protester has to be balanced with the right of the commuter, and they have to coexist and will have to live with respect, says the Supreme Court of India. And with respect to the administration, the Supreme Court has also observed that it is the right of the administration to remove such blockage in case there is something similar which happens in the near future. We also have to look at the previous precedents of the Supreme Court of India. We have one of the landmark judgments called as Ramlila Maidan incident versus Home Secretary, Union of India and others. According to this particular case, the Supreme Court had stated that citizens have a fundamental right to assembly and peaceful protest, which cannot be taken away by an arbitrary executive or legislative action. So what we have to understand is that the right to protest, to publicly question, force the government to answer, is a fundamental political right of the people that flows directly from the constitutional reading of Article 19, is what we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about flood forecasting technology. First, we have to understand what is the meaning of forecasting. What is forecasting? This is nothing but estimating the future state of the atmosphere. What is present now might not be present tomorrow. So estimating what could be the impact of the changes in the atmosphere tomorrow or after a week is what is called as forecasting. Now let's imagine a situation where you are part of the district administration, and imagine that there is a sudden increase of the river water. If there is sudden increase of the river water or there is sudden rainfall, this could also result in flooding as well. So what you have to do is to make sure that you take all precautionary measures, provide rescue operations, and immediately provide a safe place for the people so that they are taken care of in this particular incident. Also remember, this might be very tedious for the district administration. Why? Because they have very less time, because the increase could lead to loss of lives as well. It can lead to loss of economy as well. It can lead to loss of lives of children, disabled and the elder section as well. So what the administration will have to do is to make sure that this rescue operations happens on a fast basis. So what we actually understand is that forecasting beforehand becomes very important for the district administration to take all the rescue operations when it comes to flooding in that particular area. So in this article, the author goes on to say, when it comes to the flood forecasting system in India, there are certain flaws, and he also says that these flaws can be addressed by using what is called as the ensemble flood forecasting. First, let us try and understand what are the various issues and concerns as discussed under this article. When it comes to the shortcomings of the Indian flood forecasting, there are multiple issues. What are these multiple issues? We have the Indian Meteorological Department. What does it do? It issues the meteorological or the weather forecast, while the Central Water Commission issues what is called as the flood forecast. So what is it? We have the Indian Meteorological Department, which provides the weather forecast, and that is in the form of rainfall in that particular region. So this information is delivered to the Central Water Commission. So what will it do? It will use this information of the rainfall given by the Indian Meteorological Department, and the same is also used for predicting the flood forecast in that particular region. So what happens? You have multiple agencies coming together. So one agency, Indian Meteorological Department, will actually try and forecast the rainfall in that region for the next 24 hours or probably for a week as well. This information is sent to the Central Water Commission, and they predict the water forecast or the flood forecast in that particular region. But what is the major issue here? They are able to predict the forecast for that particular region, the rise in the rainfall or drop in the rainfall, rise with respect to the flood or drop in respect to the flood, but they are not giving any information with respect to the inundation. So what is the inundation here? Let's say there is the river flow that is happening. So when there is increase in the level of water, let's say about 5 centimeters or about 1 feet or 2 feet, what is the impact that it is having to the region is not being given in this particular circumstance, is the major concern under this particular issue. So what is happening here? Because they are not giving this particular information of inundation in this particular area, all the regional local administrative personnel who are supposed to rescue the people and also protect the lives of this particular people, push them to a new area which is a safe place, will not be able to take up all these precautionary measures, and ultimately the local administration will not be able to prevent the losses, is the first major issue. So what is happening here is that we have multiple agencies coming together because there is no sync, because the data is not kept in check, and that is causing a major problem to the local administration. So kindly remember, under the first issue, what we call as rainfall forecast given by the Indian Meteorological Department is also known as the quantitative precipitation forecast. This is given by the Indian Meteorological Department. The next major issue is with respect to technology. What is it about technology? The better the technology, the better is the outcome, or what we call as the forecast when it comes to the atmosphere. We have the technology which is currently used by the Indian Meteorological Department. What is it? They have about 35 advanced Doppler weather radars, and this is used to predict the forecast of the rainfall in that particular region. So they have advanced system as well. Now what we have to focus is on a term called as the lead time. So what is it? It is the length of the time from the issue of the forecast and the occurrence of the flood event. When does this happen? Let me simplify this concept for you. Let's say, for example, the Central Water Commission has issued the flood forecast. What time has it issued? It is at about 5 a.m. Let's assume it is 5 a.m. So this is the 5 a.m. where the flood forecast has been issued by the Central Water Commission. So when will this event occur? Let's say it is about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So what is the time that is present? From 5 a.m. to 3 p.m. that time is called as lead time. So what is this lead time? This is nothing but a time gap. Time gap between what? From when this particular forecast was issued by the Central Water Commission and when this particular flood actually takes place. Why is this time gap very important? It is during this particular time that all the local agencies would be able to take all the precautionary measures. If this particular time is able to expand, if we have more time gap, if we have more lead time, what we would be able to prevent is the losses of life as well as economic losses. So what is the concern right now? We have the Indian Meteorological Department, which has the advanced radar system, which is able to give all the input to the Central Water Commission, but that is not used by the Central Water Commission. Why? Because the technology that is being used by the Central Water Commission is periodically not updated and it is outdated in nature. Even if this particular technology is more advanced and they are able to provide all the inputs from the Doppler weather radars, that is the Central Water Commission, is not able to use this input and genuinely give the output on the right basis, and ultimately the time gap that is given is also very less for the local agencies to to prevent all these hazards is the second major issue. There can be vice versa as well in some of the stations where the Central Water Commission might have some of the advanced technologies, but in some of the regions there can also be the other way where the Indian Meteorological Department has some of the outdated technologies as well. It can be both the ways as well, and ultimately what will happen is this lead time should ideally be more, but this is constricting, this is very less, says the author of this article. So what we have to understand is that because of the outdated technologies and lack of technological parity between the IMD as well as the Central Water Commission, the local agencies have very less time and they are not able to prevent the losses both on the economic level and also on the human lives as well. So what is that we have to understand is that in order to overcome all these issues, what we have and we require is called as the ensemble flood forecasting. So what is this ensemble flood forecasting? Let me give you a simple example. Let's say there is a river. This is the river. So let's say the water is rising by around 1 feet, or the water is rising by about 2 feet, or the water is rising by about 3 feet. So this ensemble forecasting will identify the probability of all these sections. In case there is a rise of 1 feet, what would be the implications in that particular region? In case there is a rise of about 2 feet, what will be the implications in that particular region? In case there is a rise of 3 feet, what will be the impact to that particular environment? So what this will give is also an idea about the inundation and the flood in that particular region. Initially, when we discussed about the model that is present in India, it did not give any idea about the inundation or the impact to the environment. But under the ensemble flood forecasting, there is a probability ratio that it takes into account multiple folds, multiple ideas, and if this particular increase happens, there is a proportional raise when it comes to the inundation level. So it gives a different perspective when it comes to the ensemble flood forecasting, and that is the beauty of the ensemble flood forecasting, says the author of this article. So what is the most important factor when it comes to the Indian model? What we have is this time gap or the lead time, which is about 24 hours at the maximum. But when it comes to the ensemble flood forecasting, we have about 6 to 7 days lead time or the time gap, during which the lead agencies or the local administration would have ample amount of time to prevent all the losses, both in terms of economy as well as the human life as well. That is what is called as the ensemble flood forecasting. So what happens here? There is probability that is given, and there is also a time frame that is given where these local agencies would be able to prevent it. So what is the significance of it? The significance is the local administration would be able to make better decision making, and they would also have a better flood forecast when it comes to that region. When we take the Indian examples, we have couple of regions in India. Let's say for example in Assam, which is always devastated by river Brahmaputra, or it can be in the state of Telangana and in Andhra Pradesh where Godavari and Krishna flood as well, or we can take the example of Karnataka in Kaveri region as well. So there are a couple of river regions in India where flood forecasting becomes very important, and that is where the ensemble flood forecasting will help the local administration in addressing the disaster in that particular region is the most significant factor. So when it comes to the example, we have the United States of America, we have the European Union, and we also have Japan, which have already used this particular application, or they have already developed ensemble flood forecasting. And now when it comes to India, we have the Indian Meteorological Department, which has begun testing the ensemble model as well. They have already been employing it in 6.8 petaflop supercomputer, that is Pratyush as well as Meher. But the deficiency when it comes to this particular issue is integration when it comes to the forecasting on the rainfall as well as the flood water as well. So what we require is more integration. What we require is achieving the technological parity. That becomes the most important factor, says the the author of this article. And at the same time, to meet all these objectives, what we also require is technologically capable workforce. Who are these technological workforce? When it comes to the workforce, we also require people who are able to read the data, who are able to analyze the data and also gel up the data both with respect to the rainfall as well as the flood forecast, and they should be in a position to read what is called as the ensemble flood forecasting. So what we require is more manpower, and what we also require is technological parity on both the sides, says the author of this article. So what the author of this article says is that when we are able to implement this ensemble model, we will have the end user agencies, which happens to be the local administration. When they are given this probabilistic forecast, they would have ample amount of time to decide what would be their plans in the near future, react, prepare, undertake risk-based analysis and cost-effective rescue operations, and reduce the flood hazard across the length and breadth of India, says the author of this article. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about Code on Social Security. We have discussed in the last couple of weeks about the labor reforms. We have been discussing about the 3 labor reforms as well, and what we are focusing in this article is in specific emphasis to the Code on Social Security. So what is this Code on Social Security? Basically, you have about 9 central laws. All these laws were about the employees. This was in reference to the insurance, maternity, payment of gratuity, so on and so forth. And all these major laws, which were 9 in number, were all gelled up together, and now what we have is the Code on Social Security. So this Code on Social Security will provide all the disability insurance, health insurance, maternity benefits, provident fund, skill upgradation. And what is so unique about the Code on Social Security is, for the first time, this is also considering the unorganized workers in India. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand what is this Code on Social Security and who are these unorganized workers, and how is that the government is planning to bring them under the social security net. What we have in the first place is called as the home-based workers. Who are these home-based workers? These are the people who provide services from their homes. They do not have any office setup. They are not working for the employer. They do not have a workplace. So instead, they provide all the services from their homes. That is what is called as the home-based workers. Let me give you a simple example. Let's say, for example, there are certain families which make pickles, or let's say, for example, there are certain families which make papads as well. Such families are not working for an employer. They do not have a workplace, and such individuals are called as the home-based workers. Next, what we have is the self-employed workers. Who are the self-employed workers? As the very name denotes, they have their own employment. They do not come under the provision of the employer, so the employer does not employ them as well, but they can also have fixed amount of earning in a particular month in the unorganized sector, and their variations with respect to the salary or the outcome can also fluctuate as well. Then we have the wage workers as well. Who are these wage workers? They are provided job by the employer. When it comes to the self-employed, they do not work under the employer, but when it comes to the wage workers, they do work under the employer. But what is the difference here? The major difference is, when it comes to the wage workers, it can be temporary in nature, they can be casual workers as well, they can be migrant workers as well, and those workers who are employed by the households, which also include the domestic workers as well. Now, who are the gig workers? Let's say, for example, when you do the food on Zomato, or for example on Swiggy, you have people who come and deliver the food. Such people are called as the gig workers. Then we have something called as the platform workers. Who are these platform workers? Let's say, for example, there is an application, or let's say, for example, there is a website. On this particular website, they host their services, and people actually call them up and seek for their service. Such is called as the platform worker. So what is a platform worker? The application or the website is acting as a platform. They actually put up their services and people call for their service. That is what is called as the platform workers. Let's say, for example, you want the car driver. So the car driver here becomes a platform worker, or let's say for example you want cleaning of your tank at the homes, so that is what is called as the platform worker, or the electrician who is offering services on a particular platform. That is when you call up and ask for the electrician to come over and give his particular service. That again is what is called as platform worker. So what is this code on social security? This will make sure that all these individuals and their community will be provided the advantages in terms of disability insurance, health and maternity benefits, provident fund, and skill upgradation as well. And when it comes to the skill upgradation, we have what is called as the career centers, which has been proposed for all the job seekers under the code on social security. So what is this career center? This is one of the centers which would not only collect the information from the employee as well as the employer, but it will also give them occasional guidance, career counseling, and guidance to start their own self-employment as well. That is the importance when it comes to the career center. These are some of the features when it comes to the code on social security. However, there are some concerns when it comes to this particular issue. What are these concerns? The first issue is with respect to the eligibility. Let's say for example, the government has come up with certain criteria. This is what the eligibility is, whether I'm able to meet this criteria or not. Let's say I'm able to meet all the criteria, whether I'm a domestic worker or I'm a gig worker, but if I am meeting the eligibility, what is the surety that these benefits will be guaranteed by that particular company? What is the major issue? Let me give you an example. Let's say with respect to Swiggy, or with respect to the Zomato, you have people who would be working for 10 days, or you might also have people who would be working as part-time as well. In all these cases, why would the company want to shell out more money when it comes to these people is the first important question. Why? Because there are few people who work only for the part-time, they might work only for the 10 days, they might work only for the 20 days. So why would the company want to invest on these people is the first major concern. So the eligibility and the criteria might be met up or they might not be met up, and if they are not met up, why will the company shell out the money on this particular person is the first major concern. Then we have an other issue as well. The government has come up with this particular legislation, the government has come up with this particular law as well. So how will the government improvise it? How will the government implement it? And how will the government monitor this particular process? Previously, we have also had companies which also had stringent laws and enhanced penalties as well. This is also enhanced in the current scenario as well. But what we actually witness when it comes to the enforcement of the existing social security law, it has been very poor. Non-compliant is very rampant across all the industrial sector. So how will the government evaluate and monitor when it comes to its execution is the second major concern. And the third major concern is with respect to the state government and the central government. The central government and the state governments have previously passed number of legislations as well. And now the central government has also come up with the national board as well to make sure that all these social security benefits are reaching to the unorganized sector. But do they really have the political will and the finances to make sure that this unorganized sector is reaping the benefits of this particular social security? What this will require is political will that might not be there, says the author of this article. This will only surface whenever there is elections, or whenever there is large investment, or whenever the rates of underemployment increases, and that is when there is criticism of the government policy. Only then the government will make sure that all these benefits are given to the people, and that is only during the elections and the election year, says the author of this article. So what is that we have to understand? If the government is very serious about it, what we require is periodic evaluation, what we require is constant monitoring, and in case there are any violations, these penalties will have to be enforced strictly, and the government, that is the state government and the central government, will also require the political will to implement this particular scheme, is what this article all about. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says India Japan finalized text of pact for AI and 5G. What is the context? India and Japan have finalized a landmark cyber security agreement providing for enhancing cooperation on the 5G technology. artificial intelligence, and when it comes to the critical information infrastructure, when it comes to the cyber domain as well. Let's try and understand what is this article on the basis of cybersecurity, 5G, and Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. First is about cyber security. We have the line of actual control. What is happening? There is increasing conflict between India and China when it comes to the line of actual control. What is happening? China is increasing its territorial expanse power, and this was not taken easily by India. So India wanted to hit China where it deserves. So what does India do? India banned certain apps as well. This includes TikTok. This includes multiple other apps which were originated from China. Why? Because these were intriguing in nature. Why? Because this could be a possible security threat to India. So what does India do? India bans about 100 odd apps which were originated from China. Because India banned these applications, what we actually witness is increasing cases of cyber attack against India, and in few cases what we actually witness is hacking when it comes to the Indian applications and when it comes to the Indian website. In order to overcome this particular issue of cyber attack that is initiated from China, what we have is a cyber security pact with Japan. So what is the cyber security pact? Basically, this will provide for sharing all the strategies between India and Japan, the best strategies that both these countries have derived in order to fight the menace of cyber attack from the Chinese. So what will happen is they will maintain the integrity of the information and communication technology products going forward under the cyber security pact. The second pact between India and Japan is with respect to the 5G technology and how they have to enhance when it comes to the 5G productivity. When it comes to China, what we actually witness is increasing cases of military expansionism. This can be seen in South China Sea. This can also be seen in the land boundaries as well, where they are becoming a threat to major countries of the world. This is showing the military expansion of China. Then we also have the economic expansion as well. While United States of America is entering the protectionist mode, what we have is China expanding the economic horizons as well, and that is through the One Belt One Road initiative. And third is with respect to the digital revolution. When you speak about soft power, when you speak about technology, the countries that come first is United States of America. You take the example of Facebook, you take the example of Google, you take the example of Microsoft. It is United States of America which comes when it comes to the technology and digital revolution. To give a fight to United States of America, China was already playing its cards as well. That is through the use of TikTok and many other applications. One was also called as the 5G technology. China was planning to enforce the 5G technology and wanted to have agreements with multiple countries, but this idea of China to improvise on the digital revolution is not working well for China when it comes to Huawei technologies. Why? We have the United States of America which calls the Huawei technologies a threat and a problem for the security of United States of America. So what are they doing? The United States of America is in fact pressuring all other countries to restrict the operations of the Chinese Huawei technologies, and that is what is also being brought about by India and Japan as well. Both these countries have stripped off all the connections with respect to the Huawei, and they now have entered into an agreement to bring 5G into implementation by an agreement between India and Japan. Then we also have the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which is an initiative taken up by India, which provides a meaningful effort to create a safe and secure maritime domain, and that is in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is based on about 7 pillars. What are this? Maritime security, maritime ecology, maritime resources, capacity building and resource sharing, disaster risk reduction and management, science, technology and academic cooperation, trade connectivity and maritime transport. In all these central pillars defined by India, both Japan and China will enter into an agreement and make sure that we have a free trade and no one actually obstructs the movement when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region. Why is this important? Because we have China which is obstructing the free trade in this particular area. So what India and Japan are doing is coming up with this initiative where they will also have free trade and agreement when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region. It is this that we have to understand with reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about social vaccine. Kindly remember, we have this article discussed on one of our videos. The link for the same will also be provided in our description box. So kindly look into this particular discussion. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. Consider the following statements about Muhammad Ali Johar. He was a product of the Aligarh movement. He has a unique distinction of having directed the affairs of three most important political parties and political movements. It includes the Indian National Congress, the All India Muslim League, and the Khilafat movement. Which of the above statements are correct? The answer to this is both. Now let's look into the next practice question. The Congress Khilafat Swarajya Party was established by, is it Ram Prasad Bismil and Sukhdev Thapa, Jatindranath Das and Madan Lal Dhingra, Subhash Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru, and C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru? The answer to this is C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru. Why have we taken both these practice questions? Because of the reference to the Khilafat movement. Kindly remember, Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar was among the leading figures of the Khilafat movement. Muhammad Ali Johar was a product of Aligarh movement. He was elected to become the president of Indian National Congress Party in 1923, and it lasted only for a few months. Johar was disillusioned by the failure of the Khilafat movement and Gandhi's suspension of non-cooperation in the year 1922 owing to Chori Chora incident. And when it comes to Swarajya Party, they also came into picture after events like withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement. Kindly remember these facts because these can be very important for your preliminary examination. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to the star campaigner, which of the following statements is or correct? A recognized political party can have 50 star campaigners and an unrecognized but registered political party can have 25. The expenditure incurred on campaigning by such campaigners is exempt from being added to the election expenditure of a candidate. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 2 only. Why? Because the recognized political parties can have 40 as the star campaigners and not 50, and this is not 25 but instead it is 20. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Kindly remember, only because we have the pandemic and only because we would not have too many people campaigning, that is why this number has been reduced from 40 to 30 for a recognized party, and this has been reduced from 20 to 15 for unrecognized registered parties. Also remember, if a candidate or her election agent shares the stage with a star campaigner at a rally, then the entire expenditure on that rally other than the travel expenses of the star campaigner is added to the candidate's expenses. So what do we mean by it? We have something called as the candidate expenditure. This is what he can spend for his elections, but if there is a star campaigner who is visiting that particular election rally, his travel expenses will not be part of the expenditure of the candidate. But if this election rally, there are people who are seated, it will require loudspeakers, it will require arrangements that is taken place, that will fall under the candidate's expenses, but the expenses of the star campaigner travel will not picture into this. And also remember, when more than one candidate shares the stage or there are posters with their photographs, then the expenses of such rally meeting are equally divided between such candidates. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statements. Globally, there are 8 migratory flyways identified under the Convention of Migratory Species. India has 3 flyways: Central Asian Flyway, East Asian Flyway, and East Asian Australasian Flyway. Which of the above statements are correct? The answer to this is 2 only. Why? Because globally, there are not 8 migratory flyways. Instead, what we have is 9. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, there are 9 flyways in the world. So what is a flyway? It is a geographical region within which a single or a group of migratory species completes its annual cycle, breeding, molting, staging, and non-breeding as well. Also remember, when it comes to the World Migratory Day, it is usually held on the second weekend of May every year. It is an annual awareness raising campaign highlighting the need of conserving the migratory birds and their habitats. Now let's look into the next practice question. Carnivorous plants have adopted to grow in places where the soil is thin or poor in nutrients, especially is it because carbon is less, calcium or phosphorus or nitrogen? The answer to this is nitrogen. So whenever there is a deficiency of nitrogen, that is where these carnivorous plants are present and they feed on animals, insects, so on and so forth. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, the carnivorous plants are plants that derive some or most of their nutrients from trapping and consuming animals or protozoans, typically insects and other arthropods. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to deputy governors of RBI, which of the following statements is or correct? RBI has 4 deputy governors, 2 are from outside, 2 are promoted from within the central bank's ranks. A deputy governor could be appointed for a maximum of 5 years or till the age of 60, whichever is earlier. Which are the correct statement? The answer to this is 1. Why? Because the age is not 60 but instead it is 62. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, the RBI has 4 deputy governors and typically 2 are from outside, and which includes 1 a commercial banker, the other an economist. The 2 others are also promoted from within the central bank's rank. A central bank deputy governor can be appointed for a term with a maximum of 5 years or till the age of 62, whichever is earlier. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following pairs of terms sometimes seen in news: Belly 2 experiment, artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, digital currency, and CRISPR-Cas9, it is particle physics. Which of the above pairs given are correctly matched? The answer to this is 2 only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, this tool to edit the DNA with precision has now been given the Nobel Prize under the chemistry. What does CRISPR stands for? It stands for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. How does this technology work? Basically, we have something called as genetic sequence. There might be problem in this particular genetic sequence. So if there is a problem in this genetic sequence and there is a particular problem in one of the sequences, this is cut using the scissors, and what we have is replacement of a new gene which will not be a problem in this genetic sequence. So what is happening here is that we are using a cut and paste when it comes to the gene sequencing. What are the advantages? It can potentially eliminate all the genetic issues, diseases, multi-agricultural production, and also correct any deformatives when it comes to the genetic sequencing. Now let's look into the main practice questions. Right to protest is a powerful indicator of the political health of a nation. Explain. What are the various shortcomings with the Indian flood forecasting? How will the ensemble flood forecasting address these issues? So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review, come up with constructive criticism. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.